Happy New Year everyone. Welcome in this introductory Python tutorial, Python crash course for data science, especially for the beginners. This course has been designed for those who don't have any programming knowledge. After completing this course, you will be able to read and write Python modules and programs, and you will be ready to learn more about various Python library and modules. This course has been divided into 3 parts. In the first part, we talk about very basic things: numbers, strings, booleans, lists, dictionaries, tuples, and sets. In part 2, we talk about comparison operators, logic operators, else if statements, for and while loop, and the range function. In the third and last part, we talk about functions, how to write a function, and how to use the various methods. At the end of this course, you are given an exercise to test your ability and understanding of Python basics. You get the link of this exercise in the description box. The solution of this exercise also given. Please don't look at the solution until you solve the problem yourself. For this course, we use Jupyter Notebook from Anaconda environment. If you don't have Anaconda installed in your system and don't know how to install it, please check this video. You get the link in the description box. Now let's jump into the Jupyter Notebook. Welcome again in this Python crash course for data science. So here I am on the Jupyter Notebook. So this course we have divided into 3 parts, part 1, 2, 3. Now let's get started with part 1. So let's write some simple Python commands as we do some numeric arithmetic calculation in calculator. Let's say 2 plus 2. Then if we run this cell, then we get the result 4 as we get in calculator. How do we run this cell? To run this cell and stay in the cell, we press Ctrl Enter. If you want to run this cell and move to the next cell, then you press Shift Enter. If you want to run this cell and create another cell next to it, then press Alt Enter. Let me repeat it. So if you want to just run the cell, then press Ctrl Enter. To run this cell and move to the next cell, then press Shift Enter. And to run this cell and move to the next cell, then Ctrl Enter, Alt Enter. And this is a code cell. If you see here, this is a code cell, and the cell above this cell, which is where I write the documentation, this cell you can change it code to markdown or markdown to code. So I created this markdown to write the documentation, which is nice thing for the Jupyter Notebook. You can write the code simultaneously, you can write the documentation. Okay, now let's look at more calculation like calculator. So let's multiply 3 times 3. So multiplication we denote by this star. Let's say -1. If you run this cell, then you get 8. So 3 times 3, which is 9, 9 minus 1, which is 8. So it gives you the result as your calculator does. Okay, now let's look at exponent, the power. With Python, we use the double star operator to calculate the powers. What I mean by that, if you want to find the 5 square, 5, then you're gonna use double star 2. So if I run this cell, then I get the 5 square equals to 25. If you want to find 5 cube, then write 5 double star 3, then you get the 5 cube, which is 125. And we use the parenthesis to use for the grouping. What I mean by that is, let's group this 2 plus 3 times another group 5 plus, let's say, 2. So if you do this calculation in calculator, so calculator at first execute this part in the parenthesis and this part, then multiply the 2 results. So 2 plus 3, which is 5, 5 plus 2, which is 7, 5 times 7, which is 35. So we get exactly same answer as we do in calculator. Now let's talk about the division. Division always returns a floating number. Floating number means it contains the whole number and also fractional part. And let me divide 16 by 3, then we get 5.33. So to this syntax we use the backslash to use the division. Okay, now if you want to find only the integer result, integer part, what do? We use the double slash and run this code, then we get the integer part only. Now how do we find the remainder only? After dividing 16 by 3, what will be the remainder? 3 times 5, which is 15, 16 minus 15, which is 1. So how do we find this? This is also called the modulo. So use this syntax, 16 modulo 3, so it gives you 1. Let's try another example. 12 modulo 4. So the result is 0, because if you divide 12 by 4, the remainder is 0, because 12 is divisible by 4. Now another nice thing for the Python is you can use the documentation, you can comment your code. What I mean by that is, for example, the very first one, you can add a comment here. To make a comment, press Ctrl and this slash, then you're gonna get this hash. So this is what we are doing here is addition. So if you write the command, if you commented your code, then your code will be more readable. Okay, now let's solve a problem here. So suppose you have $100, you want to invest this $100 with 10% profit, and write a Python script to calculate how much you will be ending up after 10 years. So what you're gonna do is $100 times, for times you use the star, then the growth rate 10%, which is 1.1 for 10 years. So the power would be double star 10. Now if we run this cell, then this is the amount you will have after 10 years if you invest $100 with 10% profit. Okay, now let's talk about Python variables and data types. In Python, a variable allows you to refer to a value with a name. So to create a variable, we use the equal sign. Let me give an example to understand this thing. So let's define a variable name of, you can put anything, variable, which is equals to, let's say, 5. Remember, we cannot start a variable with number or a special character. What I mean by that, if I put one name, it gives you an error, syntax error. Or we cannot use any special character, like for example this, we cannot use that. So we always use the lowercase letter. Okay, now let's look at more example. Let's say x equals to 5, y equals to 3. Now you want to assign the addition of these two variables into another variable z, x plus y. Then what happens if you print z, so which is the addition of these two variables. So remember, in Python, this equal sign means assignment. It does not test the equality. So it's basically assignment. You are assigning these values to these variables. Okay, now once we learn the variable, now let's recalculate this problem. How you calculate it? Remember, you multiply the investment times the growth rate times 10. So instead of doing this thing, we can define some variables. For investment, let's say $100 investment variable, and this is the growth rate, and this is the year. So 3 variables we can define. So here the investment, which is a variable, we are assigning $100, and the growth multiplier, which is 1.1, and year, which is 10. And so investment times growth multiplier raised to the power year, and print the result. If we run this cell, then we get exactly same result. We get exactly same result, 259.37. So the nice thing is, if you want to see, okay, what if I invest $500 for 10 years, $500 for 10 years with the same growth rate, with the same profit rate. So you just change this variable. You don't need to change everything. So this is the outcome. Or if you want to see for different years, let's say after 3 years, what would be the amount, or after 5 years, what would be the amount. So you can check like this way. Okay, so in the previous exercise, we work with 2 types of Python data types. One is one is integer. So this investment, which is integer data type, and this one is float, because it contains both integer and the fractional part, and this one only integer. So next to these two numerical data types, there are two other very commonly used data types. These are called string and boolean. So string is a data type to represent the text, and boolean, which is which represents basically logical values, true and false. Let's look at some example to understand these two variables, string and boolean. Let me create more rooms. Alter, enter. Okay, so for the string variables, we can use single quotes or double quotes. What I mean by that is we create single quote like this, let's say single. So this is a variable, or we can use double quote. This is also a string variable, but I do prefer double quote instead of single quotes. Why? Let's look at an example. Suppose I use the single quote and you write dozen, this word, and if you run this code, you'll see there is a syntax error. So to escape this, this single quote, what you're gonna do is you use a forward slash. Now let's run this. So it works fine. So now if we use the double quote, dozen, then we don't need this slash. So this is the nice thing. If you use the double quotation, then you will not get the problem what we just saw with this. Okay, then let me print a path. Path is computer path, which is a string, for example, this path, which is a string. Now let's print a path. Print, let's say in your C drive, C : sum : name. Let's print this. So you see there is no error, but you notice this slash n, it is not printed, and after that AME, it goes to the second line. What does it mean? It means the Python considered this slash n means you are asking to create a new line. So how can you prevent this problem? There are two ways. One way is you can put double slash instead of single slash. When you have an n, put the double slash, or you see it's printed nicely. And or what you can do is you use still single slash, but you put a row, then it prints this row path. So let's do that. So you see there is no problem as well. And the next thing is strings can be concatenated with plus operator. What I mean by that, if you have two strings and if you add them, that means these two strings concatenate into one string. So, and or if you want to repeat same string multiple times, you can use the multiplication, the star. Let's look at an example for the plus operator first. Let's say plus operator. Okay, let's say one string hello plus, let's say another hello. If we run this cell, you see these two strings pasted together. This how you can concatenate. Now the second thing is with the star operator. So if you want to repeat the same string multiple times, let's say 3 times, what you're gonna do is 3 times the string. Let's say again hello, and if you run this cell, so the hello pasted 3 times. Or if you put two strings together next to each other, they are automatically get concatenated. What I mean by that is if you put two strings, let's say pi and space another string thon, if you run this cell, you see these two string concatenated, though you didn't put any plus sign. If you put the plus sign, you still get the same result. And the next thing for the string is string can be indexed or subscripted. So let's define a string. Let's say word w, which is a string variable, and let's say Python. Same word we can use, Python. Okay, now if you want to extract the first element, first item or first letter of this letter, what you're gonna do is you put the index. Remember, the index for the string is starts from 0, so the first one is 0. You count from 0, 1, 2 and so on. Okay, now let's run this cell. So you extracted this. So good practice is write a Python so that your output would be more readable. So you can get rid of this output and this quotation. You run this, okay, only P. And you can also use the negative index, because string can take negative index as well. So negative index means you start from the right. So if you want to take the very last one, you don't need to calculate 0, 1, 2, 3. You just simply pass negative 1 as index. So you get the very last one. Let's put the print n. Okay, and the next thing is we cannot change the string items. So what I mean by that is, if you want to change the P by L, you cannot do that. So let's look at this, W0, and try to reassign L. It gives you an error. Your string object does not support the item reassignment. We cannot reassign the string values. So that's all for the string. Now let's look at the second variable, Boolean, we just talked about. Let me create some room, Control Enter. Okay, for the Boolean, it is only true and false. Let's say the problem we solved, that is profitable. So is it true or false? Let's say true. So this is a Boolean variable. If it's false, then you put the false. Remember, you write the first letter T is a uppercase, and for false also you write F as a uppercase. Now let's check this type profitable, so which is a Boolean variable. Okay, next thing is type conversion. Type conversion means, so far we have learned 4 types of variables. We can convert from string to integer or integer to string and so on. And we also see that the plus operator, which is very useful to paste 2 strings together, and we can build a custom messages. Suppose, for example, you have calculated the return after 10 years, what you invested $100 for 10 years or 5 years. Now you want to summarize the result in a string. So how do you do that? You write, let's say, print and a string. I started with $100. Instead of $100, we have a variable, so we put the variable investment plus another string started. Now I have dollar sign, how much, plus the result plus, let's say, that's awesome. If I run this cell, this code, it will not work, because we cannot simply sum string and integer together, or a string and floating point together. So let's run this cell. So you see, you can only concatenate string to string, not string to integer. So how can we fix this problem? So to fix this error, we need to explicitly convert the type of these 2 variables, investment and result. So there is a function called str, string, to convert the value into string. So let's use that. Let me copy this. So let's use that str. This is called a function, building function. We'll be talking about the building function in the last part of this tutorial. So str. Now if we run this cell, there is no error. I started with $500. Let me put in a space so you can see this thing nicely. 500 and here, and also let's say here. Okay, not after the dot. Okay, so there is no error. I started with $500. Now I have this amount after 10 years or 5 years. Awesome. And there is another way we can write this summary using a format method. We'll be talking about method in details in last section. Still, let's try to use that so that you can learn this ahead of time. So instead of this, we write this entire string. So for this variable, we put a parenthesis, curly bracket. We put a curly bracket, and also for this variable, we put a curly bracket. And after the string, put format. This is called the method, format method. So we have two empty curly bracket. For the first curly bracket, I want to print investment. So put the investment first inside this parenthesis, this format method. And for the second curly bracket, we put result so that they will print accordingly. You see, there is no error. There is another way is if you have multiple curly brackets and you don't know about the order. So what you're gonna do is we can use some variable name. Let's say variable 1 and put variable 2. So 1 equals to investment, 2 equals to result. If we run this cell, we get the exactly same result. Now if we change the order, one first, two later, still you get the same result. This is the nice thing once you declare some variable. So if whatever order you put the input of this function of this method, you get the same result. Okay, so that's all for the conversation and string variables, Boolean variables. Now let's talk about next thing, which is list. So far we have learned 4 variables: float to represent the real numbers, integer to represent the integer numbers, str to represent the text or a string, Boolean to represent the false or true variables. So we define 4 variables here. The first one, growth multiplier, which is float because it contains both whole number and fractional part, and the investment, which is integer number, and x, which is a string variable, and the last one, profitable, which is true variable, which is a Boolean variable, which is also true, which is a Boolean variable. Each of these variable represents a single value. But as a data scientist, you often dealing with many data points, millions of data points, not only single variables. So for example, you want to find the heights of all members in your family. So let's say you have 6 family members. So member 1's height is 163 centimeters, members 2 height is 161 centimeter, and so on. So for all 6 members, you created 6 variables. If you have millions of data points, millions of people you are dealing with, defining millions of variables, which is not very convenient. Instead of that, what you're gonna do is we can store all this data in Python list. What is Python list? We can put all the data in with the comma and put into the square bracket. This is called a list, Python list. And this list is a compound data type. So previously we learned 4 data types, this another data type, and this called a compound data type. And this list can contain any types of data like string, integer, Boolean, or floating point. So for this case, what you can do is you can add the names of your family members so that you can distinguish which height belongs to whom. So let's say this 163 centimeter belongs to Bob, 161 centimeter belongs to Della, and so on. And another nice thing is list can contain another list, not only string, integer, or floating point. It can contain another list. What I mean by that, let's try to create a sub list with each person and the individual's height. So Bob and Bob's height. Let me copy this. What I'm gonna do is let's create another sub list with Bob and his height. Let if you put an enter, so that it would be nice to look at. So this is the list of list. Now let's run this cell. Let's say this is fam and this is fam1, two different variable. Let's say fam1. Okay, now let's check the type of these variables. Let's check the types of this variable. Now let's check the type of these two variables, fam and fam1. So type fam1, so which is a list or only fam. This is also a list. You can check the type this way using this function, type function. Now we can do the subsetting for this list. So subsetting Python list is a piece of cake. As you see, for the string, the index starts from 0. For the Python list also, the index starts from 0. Let's work with this list. So this list will be subsetting. So you want to extract the very first element, Bob. How do you do that? You just pass the first index f0. So you can find this. So to make it more readable, you can put print. So it's nice to read. And this index, this list can also take negative indexing. If you wanna get very last one, what you're gonna do is you put fam and -1. So you can access to the very last element. Or you can count from this way. There are 6 member. 12 starts from 0, so which is 11. So if you put fam 11 and on this cell, so you can see we get the exactly same result. The next thing is list slicing. You can slice the list. For example, you want to get the data for Della and her mom. So Della, the index for Della is 0, 1, 2, and her mom's height, it's a 2, 3, 4, 5. So 2 to 5. So when you put the interval 2 to 5, remember for the Python, lowercase is inclusive, uppercase is exclusive. So we put the index for that, which is 6. What I mean by that is we write something like this, fam2:6. If we run this cell, we see it is printed for Della 1 and her mom. So this lower bound, which is inclusive, the upper bound is exclusive. This is a Python syntax. Now if you want to find the very first 4 elements, what you're gonna do is you put fam 0, 4. If you run this, you get first 4 Bob and Della. What if I remove this lower bound? Still you get the same result. That means Python consider if you don't put anything, that means you want the elements from the very beginning. And if you want to get the very last 4 elements, what you're gonna do is you can either put the negative indexing or you can put the positive indexing. So last 4, these 4 elements, the index for grandpa is 8. So what you're gonna do is you put 8, very last one, which is 11. If you put this, actually we put 12 because 12 is not included. Okay, so or if you leave it blank, still you get the same result, same as what you did for the first 4 elements. If you don't put the upper bound, that means you want all the elements up to the last one. Or you can use the negative indexing, -4, leave the upper bound blank. So let's run this cell, then we get the very last 4 elements. The next thing is manipulating the list. Work with the same list, manipulating list. And let's get some room, Alt Enter. So how do we manipulate list? We can change the list elements, or we can add new elements, or we can remove elements from the existing list. Let's say I want to change this Bob to Mark. How do you do that? Put the index 0 so which is equals to a string mark. Okay, then let me print this, print fam. So you see the name Bob replaced by Mark. And the next thing is, if you want to add some more elements into the same list, how do you do that? Let's say I want to add myself. So fam2 equals to family1 plus I want to add myself, me, and let's say my height. Then if I run this, if I print this and let me put the print, then you can see this nice way. Okay, so me and 164 added. And the third one is, how can we remove elements? Let's say I want to remove Mark. So what you're going to do is use the del function. Remember, this is a function. We'll be talking about function in the last part of this course. Okay, then use the parenthesis and put the list, and I want to remove Mark from fam2, so which is fam2. So the index for Mark is 0, and then we'll print fam2 and run this cell, so Mark is deleted. Or I want to delete me and 164, so which is -2 to all the way last element. Now if we print me and 164 deleted, this is how we can remove the elements from the list. Okay, now next thing is, what happens when we create a list. So behind the scene, there is a spell behind the scene. Let me create some rooms. Okay, what happens when we create a list? So it stores the data points in the computer memory. For example, x equals to 1, 2, 3. So this is a list, and this x does not contain the list. This x does not contain the list. It refers to the list. So it contains the reference to the list. So the basic operations, for the basic operations, the difference is not that important. However, the problem creates when you try to copy this list and do the operation. What I mean by that is, if you copy this list, let's say y equals to x, then if you do the operation, let's say y of 0, you want to change the first element equals to, instead of 1, you want to change 1 to 0. Now let's print y. So the first element of y has been changed. How about x? Notice that here x has also changed, because both x and y refer to the same list. When you copy x into y, you are actually copying the reference. So there are two ways you can prevent this problem. One is you use the list function. Let me copy this again. So use a list function, list of x, and let's print x also. So if I run this cell, you see this time only y has changed, but x remain unchanged. And another way is you can use the colon when you copy. So you can put x colon this. So you are creating a new list. So if you run this cell, so you see the first element has not changed for x, and y has changed. This is how we can prevent when you copy list. The next and important thing is called the dictionary. Let me create some rooms here. Dictionary. So for dictionary, you can create dictionary by curly brackets, and dictionary takes a key pair value like hash table. Let me give an example. D equals to, start with curly brackets, the first key, let's say key 1, and colon the value, corresponding value. Let's say key 2, then colon second value. So this is a list. This is a list, and this is a dictionary. So this is a key, and this is corresponding value, second key, and corresponding value. Let me put key 2. Okay, so for the dictionary, the indices are the keys, not 0, 1, 2, what we do in list and string. What I mean by that, if you try to find the first element, first value using the 0 indexing, it gives you error, right? It's not like the list. So if you want to access the value, you access using the corresponding key. What I mean by that is something like this. So key 1, you pass the key 1, then you can access to the first value. If you put key 2, you access to the second value. This is how you can access to the value using the corresponding key. And the dictionary, so this value can be anything, any types, like it could be a list, it could be a string or floating point. Let's look at an example with a list. Let's say d equals to, there is another list. For simplicity, let me write k1 as a key 1, and the corresponding value is a list. Let's put on a simple list. Okay, so how can we access into the second element of this list, this value? So what you're gonna do is we pass the key first to access into the list. This is how we can access to the value. And now to access the second element, you already know how to use the index for list. So for the second value, the index is 1, first one is 0, then 1. Now if we run this code, this cell, then we get 2. And this dictionary can also contain another dictionary, like nested dictionary, like the list can contain another list or sub list. Let's go to the nested. Let's look at an example, nested dictionary. So let's say d equals to, use the curly bracket and the key 1, then the value is another dictionary. So start with the curly bracket, and since it's a dictionary, you need a key. Let's name it inner key, inner k1, inner key. Then the value is, let's say, another list. It's the same list, 1, 2, 3. Now again, how can you access into this second value of this list? So at first, what you're gonna do is you access into this inner dictionary, which is the value of this corresponding key k1. So you use the corresponding key k1 to access into the inner dictionary. Now to access into the list, so we use the key for the inner dictionary. So we put this, then we can access into the list. Once you have list, you can easily access to the second element, which is the index 1. This is how we can play with the dictionaries. The next thing is tuples, which is similar, but instead of curly bracket or square bracket, this time we use parenthesis. Let me create some rooms with Ctrl Enter. Okay, let's start with a very simple tuple. Let's say t equals to 1, 2, 3. We can do the indexing same as list or string. If you put t0, then you see we can access into the first element of this tuple. How about reassignment? If you want to reassign the very first element, instead of 1, if you want to replace this by 5, it gives you error, because tuple does not support the item reassignments, because tuples are not mutable and user cannot change the items in the tuples. Okay, the next thing is set. So you learn from your high school what is set. Set is a collection of unique elements. It does not contain duplicate elements. So there is no duplicate elements in the set. And for the set, you use the curly bracket and same as dictionary, but for this case you don't have corresponding key. So let's put some values, items 1, 2, 3. So this is a set. And remember, according to the definition, unique elements, no duplicate elements. So what if we put duplicate elements? 1, 1, 2, 3, 3. If you run this cell, you see it gives you only the unique elements. It eliminates the duplicate elements. So one nice application of this set is, if you have duplicate entries in a list, you can eliminate all the duplicate elements duplicate entries or elements from the list using set. What I mean by that is there is a function called set function. Set, we will be using this function. So if you have a list, let's say 1 1 2 3 3 4 5 5. So this list you have duplicate elements. You want to get rid of this duplicate. What you're gonna do is you simply pass this function, this list into the function. So you can see you get only the unique elements, but the output is a set. You want a list with unique elements. So what you're gonna do is you put another function. This is called the list function. Then you can see a list with a square bracket and with unique elements. And the next thing is you can add the elements into a set as we did for the list. Suppose you have a list s equals to 1 2 3. This is a list. You want to add another elements, so we use the add method. As I mentioned earlier, we will be talking about method in details in section 3, last section. So add, let's say you want to add 4, then let's print this. Let's see 4 has been added with the list. Okay, now how can we create an empty list? Empty set. So for the empty set in calculus, in the algebra, what we do, we use the empty bracket, but empty bracket is not an empty set. Let me write empty set. So let's define an empty set. So this is not a set. A is not a set. Let's check the type of A, which is a dictionary, not set. So how do you define a empty set? So we use the set function. Set this empty parenthesis. Now if we print this type A, then we see this is a set. This is how we can create an empty set. So that's all for the part 1. Let's recap. So at the beginning we talk about some arithmetic operations as we do in basic calculator. Then we talk about some variables types. How can we assign a variable and name a variable? And then we talk about 4 types of variables: string, floating point, integer point, and boolean. Then we talk about list, and then how to manipulate the list, and then we talk about the tuples, which is not mutable, and finally we talk about dictionaries. We talk about the sets. After tuples we talk about sets. Welcome back in the second part. In this part we will be talking about comparison operators, logic operators, else if statement, for loops, while loops, and the range function. This is very short part. So let's get started with comparison operators. This comparison operators allows you to compare 2 elements each other. Let's get some rooms. Alter enter. Okay, so let's compare 2 values. One is greater than 2, so which is not true. So the result would be a boolean, true or false. So it gives you false. If you write 1 is less than 2, then it gives you true. This is a boolean result. The output is boolean. Or if you write 2 is less than or equals to 3, which is also true. Or if you write 2 is greater than or equals to 1, it gives you true because the statement is true. And if we write equality check 2 equals to 2, it gives you true. Remember, this is not a single equal sign, so you are not assigning 2 to 2, you are checking equality, so it gives you true. What if I put single equality sign? So it gives you error, syntax error, because you cannot assign 2 to a variable 2. That means this statement means you are assigning 2 in this variable 2. We learned about the variable part. In the first part we learned variable cannot start with a numeric value, so we cannot do that. Okay, then you can check also a string variable, whether 2 string variables are equal or not. Let's say hello equal, let's say by. They are not equal, so you get false. The next operator is called the logic operators. So you can combine multiple condition together. Let's create some rooms, alter control. Okay, so let's combine two conditions together. Let's say 1 is greater than 2, which is false, and 2 is less than 3. If I run this cell, then which is false. So it is good practice to use the parenthesis, close this thing, then your code would be more readable. This is one condition and this is another condition in this parenthesis. So this is false. What if I change this and to or? So it gives you true. Or means one of them is true, false or true. And we can use multiple conditions together, like more than 2 conditions. So let's say 1 equal 2, you are checking whether or equal or not, or 2 equal 2, or 3 equal 4. If we run this cell, we get true. Because we use the or operator, at least one of them is true. So this one is true. So how can we understand this thing when we get true or false? If you have true or false, then you get true. At least one of them is true. If you write true and false, this is false because one of them is true. You write the and operator. Okay, the next thing is else if statement. Let's create some room. So we basically talk about some code block, and if your condition if statement satisfies, then the next code block will be executed. What I mean by that, let's write a simple code. If let me assign a variable. Let's say x equals to 3. Now if x is less than 2, x is less than 4, then execute the following code. Print, let's say yes or no, right? If it is true, then it executes yes. So remember, after the if statement, for the second line you intended, if you put the cursor here and put the enter, it's automatically get intended. Okay, let's run this code. So x is less than 4, so this is true. But if x is 5, so it will not, this line will not be executed because this condition does not satisfy. So if I put it 6, then it satisfies. Okay, now let's look at if else statement. If x is less than 6, then print yes, else print no. So if I run this code, this is true, that's why this line executed, not this line. But if I put the condition is false, so this time this is not. So since this condition is not true, so this line is not executed, it's executing the last one. For the true statement condition, it executes the first one, yes. Okay, now if we put multiple conditions together, like 2-3 conditions together, let's say if x equals to 3, then print the first or execute this line. If x equals to 5, then print this line, let's say middle, and if both of them false, then execute this line. Else print the last one, let's say last. So if I run this cell, the middle round executed, because the first statement is not true, so it's not executing the second one. So it's checked for the second condition. Second condition is true, so it's printed this one. What if the second condition is not true? Let's say x equals to something else, 4. Now it's executing the very last one. And notice another thing here, for the very last statement, else statement, you don't have to put the condition like this one. If this satisfies, then go for this. You don't have to write if x is greater than 5 or equal to 5. Same thing goes for this. If x is not if x is equals to 3, if it's true, false, and this is also false, print the last one, something like that. Now let's go for the for loops. So if we have a sequence, let me create some rooms. Alter, enter. Let's say create a sequence. Let's say s equal 1 2 3 4 5. Let's say this is a sequence. Then we can use for loop to execute for every single elements of the sequence. So what I mean by that, we can write a for loop for item in s. Let's say this is sequence, so that it would be more readable. Sequence, okay. Item in sequence, then print item. Let's run this code. We can see all of them in printed. Remember, this item, it is a temporary variable. This item does not related to this item. What I mean by that is, if I change this item to, let's say, some string hello, if you run this code, so hello printed 5 times. So this item referring every element for the sequence. For each element, this hello is printed. This hello is printed. And also, if you want to find the square of each element, what you're gonna do is, let me copy this thing, and instead of item, you can put I, or you can put just number. Let's say num, and you want the square, print the square. So what you're gonna do is this. You can use a for loop to find the square of each elements of the sequence. Okay, next loop is while loop. So let me create some rooms. Alter, control, enter. Okay, so let's define a variable I equals, let's say 1. Then for the while loop, same as the if statement, you put a condition. Let's say I is less than 5. If this condition satisfies, then print the next block of this code. Print, let's say I is, we can put this method, format method. You are already familiar with this format. Then put I inside, right? If I run this code, it will run forever, because I equals to 1, which is always less than 5. So it will run forever. So what you're gonna do is, we increase I by 1. So I equals to I plus 1. So every time you are increasing by 1. First time it was 1, so 1 plus 1. Second time it will be 2. Third time 2 plus 1 would be 3. When this condition violates, then the loop will be stopped. So this is called the breaking point. Okay, let's run this cell. Oops, format is the mistake. Okay, so you see I is 1, I is 2, and so on. Once the condition violates, then your while loop stops. Okay, the last thing for part 2 is range function. Let me create some rooms. Control enter. Okay, range function. So if you need to iterate over a sequence of numbers, the building function, this is a building function, range comes in handy. So it generates arithmetic progression. What I mean by that is, let's say range If I put some number inside, let's say 5, if we execute this, so you see it's basically it gives you 0 to 5. So how do we do that? We write a for loop. Let's say for I in range 5, then print I. Remember here 5 is excluded, so you're gonna get 5 numbers starting from 0. So let's execute this thing. So we start from 0, we got 5 values here. So this function is very useful, especially for the for loop. And also if you want to create a list of element from 0 to, let's say 0 to 100 or 0 to 5, so you can use the list function. So you write this function inside the list function. If I run this cell, then I see there is a list. Or if you want the list from, let's say 100 to 200, then you put something like this. Oops, there is a mistake, which is a comma. Yep, this is a comma. So we put print and run this, then you can see this thing nicely. Okay, that's all for part 2. So we learned 6 things. The first thing we learned, which is a comparison operator, where you can compare 2 values and whether true or false. Then we talk about the logic operators, and then we talk about statements, if else statements. Then we talk about 2 loops, one is for loops and the second one is while loop. Then we talk about a very useful function, range function. That's all for part 2. Now let's start the very last part, part 3. You are almost there. You almost finished the course. Awesome. Okay, let's get started. Let's talk about the functions first. What is a function in Python? So a simple answer is a reusable code. You don't have to write same code again and again. And each function solves a particular task. Let's look at an example, then we can clearly understand what I mean. Okay, let me create some rooms with Control Enter, Alt Enter. Okay, let me define a function. So the keyword def introduces a function definition. Right after that, you put the function name, your function name. Let's say my func. The function name is my function, and it takes some inputs. It can take single input or multiple input. Let's put only single parameter to keep it simple as a first example. Okay, then print, let's say hello, and plus put the parameter, and then put this. Okay, this is a function. If you execute this code, you will not see any output. Now you're gonna use this function. Let's take this function, grab this function, and put the user input. Let's say Bob. So if you run this code, it gives you hello Bob. Let's put a space here so you can see this nicely. Hello Bob. If you change another name, let's say Della, then you can see hello Della. Okay, so another nice thing is you can put a default parameter. What I mean by that is, let me copy this code, and param equals to, let's say default, F-A-U-L-T, default. Okay, now if I run the code without any input argument, I mean without any input parameter, then still the code runs. So there is a default parameter, so it gives you this default parameter. What if I put my user input, let's say Bob, so it will print hello Bob. Okay, now if I don't put the parentheses, what does it mean? Let me create some more rooms here. Okay, if I run this, that means it's saying this is a function and the function name is my func, and it takes one parameter, one input parameter, and default is the default parameter. Okay, now let's look at another example. So to have better understanding, this time you define a function, and the function gives you the square of the input. What I mean by that is, let's define the function first. Okay, def, and you can name it square. Instead of writing my func, it's better to write the function name, a meaningful function name, a square, square, and the input parameter is, let's say, x. And then you can write return x square double star 2. So this is a function. Now if I run this, if I call this function square, if you put 5, then it gives you the result. Another good practice is including the documentation string in the code. What I mean by that is, you put the documentation string here. So we put this triple quotation, then you can write whatever you want here. Let's say this function gives you the square, so I write this, this function gives the square of each input. Don't need this space to make it more readable. Okay, now why do I put this string? Suppose this square, if you don't know what this square, what does this square do, what you're gonna do is, you keep the cursor right after the square, then you press shift tab, then you can see this documentation. With the signature, you see the square x, and then the docstring, this function gives the square of each input. Checking docstring is very useful when you use the built-in function, and there are many built-in functions as well. So suppose you want to find the minimum height of your family members. So what you're gonna do is, you can use the built-in function min. So what I mean by that is, let's say smallest person in your family, smallest equals to, and mean this function, and pass the list. And also for the tallest, it's gonna check, which is equals to max, and pass the list. Now let's print this too. In smallest, then print tallest. If we run this code, oops, there is a mistake. Okay, so the minimum height is 159, which is this, and maximum is 167. The nice thing is, though you don't know the function max and min, how they work, still you can use them to fill your need and make your life easy. This is how you can use the built-in function. Now let's look at a built-in function with multiple input. I mean more than 2 input or more than 1 input. So let's create some rooms, Alt or Enter. Okay, suppose you have a number 67.273, something like that. You want to round at this number. So there is a function called round built-in function, round, and give the input, let's say 60.2663, let's say. Okay, if I run this code, then it is rounding up, because this number 0.25, which is less than 0.5, if it's more than 0.5, then you will get the rounded up number. So you get the 68 number. What if you want to round it to the 2 decimal place or 1 decimal place? What you're gonna do is, instead of 1 input, you're gonna give 2 inputs. So the second input, let's say I want only one decimal place after the point, so you get 67.6. If you want the two decimal point, you put 2, then you get 67.57. So the second element is the second input is how many decimal place you want. That's what you are specifying. Okay, now the question is how do you know how many inputs one function takes? So there is a function called one way I already show you. You can put the cursor here, then press Shift tab, then you can see the documentation strings, number and number of digits. This is none by default, so it's rounded to the decimal digits. So if you don't put this input, so it's rounded up or rounded down based on the number you have after the point. Okay, so another thing is you can use a help function, help, and inside this you put this function, then you can see the documentation string here as well. And another way, the third way, you can put the question mark, then put the round and run this cell, then you can see the documentation string here. 3 ways you can check about a function, building function. Okay, let's practice more on the function to get better, to have a better understanding. Okay, now let's create 2 variables. One is a list, variable 1, which is a list, let's say 1 2 3 4, and then one boolean variable, so variable 2, which is, let's say, true. Okay, now you know the type of this variable is list. This one is a boolean variable. Now there is a function called length function. So how can you measure the length of this list? You know there are 4 elements, that means the length is 4. If you have unknown number of elements or items or millions of items, how can you check? There is a function, building function called length, L-E-N, length, then put variable 1, variable 1, so the length is 4. And another nice thing is, which is a conversion, I should talk this earlier. So you can convert this boolean variable to integer variable. How can you do that? So if you check the type of variable 2, which is a boolean variable, now you can convert this variable into integer variable. Let's say variable 3, which is equals to, I want to convert this boolean variable into integer variable. Then check the type of variable 3, so which is integer, and what is that? Variable 3, which is 1. If you convert the boolean variable true, you convert to the integer, you get 1. If you convert false boolean variable, you get 0. So 0 means false, 1 means true. This is how it works. Okay, now let's talk about the next thing, lambda expression. So before that, let's talk about a function again. So let's define a function, def, let's say times 5, whatever input you put here, you're gonna get the output is a 5 times of the input. So return 5 times x. So this is the function. If I call this functions times 5 inside, let's say I put 9, 5 times 9, which is 45, that's you are expecting. And suppose okay, let's define another list, which is a function. So I should write list 1, which is equals to, let's say 1 2 3 4. Now I want to execute this function for each of these elements in this list. So we can use a for loop to do that and append into another list. So however, there is a Python building function map, map, that allows you to do that. So what I mean by that is the map function. Let's get some room, alter, enter. Okay, this function, then this function takes this function as input, comma this list. If I run this cell, so it's saying this is a map stored in the computer memory at this location. Okay, now you want to see the list. So what you're gonna do is you use the list method, you use the list function. Inside the list function, you put this entire thing, copy and paste. Then I can see the 5 times of my given list, the given list. Okay, so instead of writing a function, then passing into a map function, we can do this in one single line of code. That's where lambda expression comes into play. So this is very handy. So what I mean by that, let me show you this step by step for the lambda expression. So we are talking about the lambda expression. Lambda expression. Okay, let's look at. Let me copy this function first. How we can build a lambda expression. I mean, we can express the whole thing in one line of code. So this is the function. What you can do is we can write in one line of code, right? Still it works. Let me show you an example. Let's say times 5. If you put this, still this works. So there is no problem. Okay, what you're gonna do now is I can omit this function name and definition. I don't need this, and I don't need this return as well. And instead of definition, I put the lambda. Okay, so this is called lambda expression. If I run this code, it says it's a function but lambda expression. Okay, now instead of writing a function and passing into a map, we can write this lambda expression, and in the lambda expression we can pass the function. Instead of passing a function into the map, we can pass this lambda expression. Okay, what we did here is this one. Okay, let me copy a step by step. Let me copy this first. So for this one, we define a function here. Instead of this, we simply write this lambda expression. So we don't need to define a function separately. If I run this code, we get exactly same result, like this is a map stored at this location. Now you want the list, so I put the list function. If I run this code, we get exactly same result. So the nice thing is, for this case, you define a function first, and then you pass this function into the map building function together with the list. Then the whole thing you pass into the list. All this thing you can do in just one line of code. You write a lambda expression into the map and the list, and you can create the list. So if you get confused with this lambda expression as a beginner, please feel free to use this definition and pass into this function and pass into the map function. Once you get experience in coding, then you can use this. Okay, now let's talk about filter. Filter has very similar structure to the map. Instead of applying to every single element of the list, it filter out some elements from the list or sequence. Now let's look at an example. It's exactly same structure as the map. So what you're gonna do is write your function filter, then write the lambda expression. Lambda, let's say item, and item modulo 2 equals to 0, and list 1. If we run this thing, this is a filter stored in the computer memory at this location. Now you pass the entire thing into list, same as you did for map. So if we run this, so it gives you all the elements that are multiple of 2. Okay, now the last thing, which is methods, very useful. And if you have a list and you want to find an index of the list, how can you find index of an element in a list? Or if you want to reverse the list, how can you do that? There is no such function to do that. So there are some methods associated with all the objects, like all these objects in integer, float, string, list, including dictionaries. So there are some methods available, we can use them. So let's start with the example, with the family members example, with the height. So suppose you want to update dad's height. So if it's a list of millions of elements, for a particular element it is really hard to count the index, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like this. So in that case, what you're gonna do is we can use a index method, fam.index, then put the value dat. If I run this code, then we can see the index is 6, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is how we can find. And another method that is called the count method. Okay, let me look at another one. Fam dot, let's say Bob, which is index 0. Oh, excuse me, dot index. Okay, let me show you another thing. If you put fam and dot and then press tab, then you can see all the options, all the methods. There are many methods. You can sort, you can reverse, you can remove, you can pop up, you can insert. There are many methods you can explore. For this one, we are using only the index method. Index, and then put Bob. If I run this cell, oops, it's a lowercase. If I run this cell, so we get the correct index 0. There is another method called count. If you want to see how many people have the same like 161 height. So how can you do that? You can write fam count dot count and pass the number. So only one person. And if you want to pop or delete, remove very fast last letter, what you're gonna do is you use the method called pop this. So if you run this cell, so you are popping 160. Now if you look at the list fam, then you can see the very last one, 160, removed from the list. Okay, then if you want to add this back 160, there is a method called append method. I talked about this earlier, but we didn't use that yet. So if you want to add this 160 back, what you're gonna do is fam dot append. This is very useful when you write a for loop with the empty list. You can append the data. So let's say I want to append 160 and check the list again. I got 160 back in the list. So not only list, you can you have some methods associated with string, float, and integer. So let's look at some example for string. Let me create some rooms. Suppose there is a string variable brother Bob. So with this brother, you can check with by pressing tab what methods available. There is a capitalized, we can use this. If you put this and run this cell, so the first letter actually gets capitalized if it's a lowercase. Let me put this lowercase, then you understand what I mean by that. So it was lowercase, it makes the first letter gets capitalized. You can use this capitalized letter. And another function is called the count. How many times B appears in this word? So what you're gonna do is brother dot count and specify what letter you want to count. So B, it appears 2 times. And if you want to make all the letters lowercase, there is a function, there is a method called lower. Let me define a string. Let's say how are you. So this is the string. Now if we use the lower method, string lower method, if you run this, okay, string dot lower, we run this cell, we see everything gets lowercase. If we put the uppercase, let me delete this. If you want everything is uppercase, so you put upper and run this, then you get all the letters are uppercase. And another nice and useful method is called the split. So let's write a string, give some room, a string dot split. If we run this, then you see all the words gets splitted. So you can specify a location where you want to split the string. What I mean by that is, let's define another string. A string equals to, let's say, how are you? Then let's put some exclamatory here sign. Then what are you doing? Now I want to split this at this location, this sign. So what you're gonna do is the string dot use the same method split and specify the location this. Now let's run this so we can see this. This is how it works. Okay, let me put something else. Let me put this, then we can see both. There you go. Now we can see this. Now what happened? Oh, okay. Previously it takes this function, this string. That's why we got the wrong answer. Okay, let me put back with the same sign and see what happens. Yes, it works. We get exactly same thing. If we run this, we get the same thing. Okay, now another method is called the replace method. You can replace the letter. Let's say for the Bob, brother, you want to replace this B by Y. So what you're gonna get is brother dot replace, and you want to replace B, so you put first B by what? By Y. If I run this, then I see the B, both B replaced by Y. Okay, now recall the dictionary. Dictionary also associated with some methods. So let's recall the dictionary. Let me define a dictionary. D equals to, so you need the key first. Remember, key K1, let's say, then first element is 1 and K2, and the corresponding value is 20. Okay, now there is a method called dot keys. If I press this, then you can grab or extract all the keys. And if you want to grab only the values, there is a method called values. D dot values. If you run this, then you can grab only the values. Or if you want to grab item wise, like the first key and this element one item, this another item, so there is a method called items. Run this code, then you can grab the items. Okay, one more thing is the in operator. You already use this in operator using the range function. Let's look at this again. Suppose you have a string variable x, string x. You are gonna check whether it is in this list or not. If I run this cell, it gives you false. So it gives you false because this letter is not, this string is not in this list. So how about this? If I have an x in, let's say x, then 2, 3. For this case, this is true. This is true. So this is useful. We'll be using this thing in a minute. And the next thing is tuple unpacking. Let me create some rooms. Alter, enter. We are almost done. Okay, so this is a list of tuples. So how can you extract the values? How do you unpack these values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? What I mean by that is one way I can do this is for the first element I put x0, so you can access to the first tuple. Now to access to the first element of the first tuple, you put another index 0, then this how we can do. But I want to grab all the values. So in this case, we use a for loop. For item in X, we can print item. So we can grab all the tuples, but I want to unpack them, all the tuples, unpack them. So how can I do that? In that case, we can write another for loop. In this case, we grab item like this way, tuple and B in X, then I print A, enter this. So you can grab all the first elements for each tuple, but I want both 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you're gonna do is you print B as well. So this is how you can unpack the tuples. And the last thing for this course is list comprehension. Suppose you have a list X. So what you're gonna do is you want to find the square of each element. So what you're gonna do is, let's create an empty list. This is how we can do. Then we use the append method, what we just learned. So for item in X, and then you append the square of each element. Out.append, you are appending into this and put item square. For a square, you use the double star. And now I print item, print out is the list. That's not intended. So you see, this list contains the square of each element in X. This is how we can do this. So list comprehension provides a concise way to do this in one line, just like a lambda expression you did. So how do you do that? At first you grab this for loop, this statement, and put it here. Then grab this square, the output you are appending, put it right before the for loop and put them into square bracket. Now if you run this thing, you see exactly you get the square. You don't need to write the for loop. So this is very common in Python, and this is called the list comprehension, and this is called the backward for loop. Your for loop is after the what you are executing, what you are trying to find. So as a beginner, you may not get comfortable with this. So in that case, go ahead and use the for loop. Once you get better and better in Python, you can use this single line of code. That's all. Wonderful, you have done it. Now the next thing is not part 4, this is the exercise. So in this exercise, you'll be given some problems. So you can test your understanding of basic Pythons, and the link of these problems I put into the description box, and I also put the solution in the description box. Please don't look at until you solve by yourself. You test your learning from this course. Congratulations, you have done it. Now what is next? The next step is learning the popular libraries for data science and machine learning. Numpy is the most frequently used one. We already have a tutorial on Numpy. You get the link in the description box as well. Thanks everyone. I hope to see you again.